Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Ali. So, yeah, let's dive into what's happening on the VNEM side, which really affects the multifamily market directly. Why is this, I mean, having lived in California and having put solar on my home before, so I do know that, as a residential homeowner, I benefited greatly economically from putting solar with a 4-year payback, and then I was part of the NEM 1.0 cohort, if you will. So essentially, cost me 4 years of electricity, but thereafter, I pretty much 95+% of my bill was uh, zeroed out. So I get 20+ years of free energy thereafter. So in the case of VNEM and multifamily, we there are solutions in the market, one of which we're familiar with, Ivy, as your client and a company that John and I are invested in and vested in and associated with. They have when I first met Ivy, and my first reaction was, what a beautiful solution. It's essentially a win-win-win solution for the landlords, the tenants, the developers, EPC companies, even the grid, if you think about it with a certain perspective, because it essentially helps the grid be more resilient, less capital intensive, and still do the main function with much less capital, and that capital not being deployed by them, but others at the edge of the grid. So can you tell us a little bit about this world and why what is being proposed right now is unfair? And let's also talk about other players and how it affects everyone else in this sector as well.
Yeah, happy to. So, right now, again, like virtual net metering has been helping many multifamily buildings and renters install solar and have a way to monetize the resource so they can pay back the asset that was invested in originally, as well as provide a means of sharing some of the financial benefits with tenants so that they get discounts on their electric bills. One thing that's really unique about any sort of multi-meter arrangement when you're installing solar on a property is that, unlike the house where I talk about the single meter recording production and consumption through one venue, and really your connection to the grid, there's a single service delivery point or point of interconnection to the home. It's easy to monitor the flow of power in and out. So in multi-meter arrangements, there's a production meter that measures production of the solar energy system on site, and there are consumption meters measuring individual electricity consumption by each of the tenants, and the meters are separate. So now the electricity flows are governed by the laws of physics and Kirchhoff's current law, where electricity will flow to wherever there's least resistance, meaning it will flow to serve the on-site customer load of each of those individual meters. And any excess electricity produced beyond what is required by all those customers at a given time interval will be exported beyond the property to the grid. And so a element of measuring on-site consumption of the generation asset is this concept of netting, which essentially nets production and consumption in a given interval, since those meters are separate. In a single meter arrangement, you don't need that mechanism to measure self-consumption because you have one bidirectional meter.
So if you're producing with solar, you're also and you're consuming at the same time, you're essentially producing that. I mean, provided that you've paid for the solar panels already, that's free energy for you at that point. You're not pulling that from the grid in a single family home environment. So because your net is assuming your netting is zero for that split second. But in the case of multifamily, that's different.
The netting mechanism is required to ensure that in a given time interval, you can measure or net production against consumption because the meters are separate in a multi-meter. Right. This is really important. I'll come back to why this is so important in the proposed decision. But essentially, on-site customer load and the generating asset of a multifamily building is serving the needs of those customers when they have load and when there is generation being produced at the same time. Unfortunately, our utilities have tried to lie and misrepresent the physics of electricity and how electrical engineering principles work in a multi-meter arrangement like a multi-family building at the CPUC. And so this has become a very contentious issue where they would like to measure all of the output from a shared solar asset at a multi-family building as if it is all exported to the grid, and therefore you would only get valued for your solar exports at basically a wholesale rate.
Which is like 1/5 of retail rate. I mean, one is probably valued at 25 to 40 cents, which is what the richest 15% of homeowners that already have solar are benefiting from currently. And this multifamily building owner is forced to sell it at the wholesale rate, which averages around 3 to 8 cents for 90% of the time, maybe averaging around 5, 6 cents, if my understanding is correct.
Yes,
would you
exactly.
agree with that? Yeah.
Essentially, with this construct, not only would you get a really bad financial deal where all of your exports are valued at this super low
Yeah,
rate,
like 5 times worse than the others, pretty much. Yeah.
but it's also not physically correct, where meters are just measurements at a certain point of electron consumption.
You're right.
Now, the physics say that, again, multifamily buildings are consuming that electricity on site, which helps them offset the amount of electricity that they would need to import from the utility at a retail rate. So, and multifamily buildings, by virtue of having so many customers under one roof and under one service delivery point, they're able to serve the on-site customer load of many different tenants before anything is exported to the grid. So it's a really powerful demand management solution, even without storage. So even with solar generated on site, because it has so many more avenues of individual tenant customers where it could serve their needs before it's exported, it reduces demand on the grid in a much more significant manner than a homeowner that installs solar, where it has a one-to-one generator customer relationship. So it's a really powerful tool. And without that netting construct that I mentioned earlier, if you're forced to export or treat and account for all of your exports as exported when you were really consuming them on site, that retail value, as you mentioned, of self-consumption would be valued at 25, 40 cents, 60 cents, whatever the service territory is. But instead, you are being forced to account for it as exported at 4 to 6 cents, which is a horrible financial deal. And it also could constitute a taking of private property. So there's some really bad issues with just that construct of accounting and what that actually means in practice for the building owners and the renters when we're talking about accounting.